Hello everyone. Yes, I foolishly volunteered to do a talk because, we were getting 5-10 people along it, so I'd be fine. And then the numbers started picking up again, so that went wrong. So hello, I'm Lee. I'm one of the organisers of PHP Southwest. For my day job, I manage our customer journey team at Gradwell. And this is where I have to admit to you that in my day job, I don't write PHP code. So, leave now, that's it. And that's where this talk came from, because I don't write PHP code. I help write stuff for Salesforce. I help non-developers sort of use Salesforce in a low-code way, using drag and drop. So that's where I thought I'd share some insights so we could have a look and see how, as developers, we possibly should care about this sort of thing. So what is low code? A talk isn't complete without a copy and pasted definition of a term off the internet, so here is one. Low code is a software development approach that requires little to no coding in order to build applications and processes. Essentially, let's use the mouse and not write some code. I sort of split these up into like 3 areas because it's a bit of an umbrella term. You've got application builders. There's one called Mendix, which runs on AWS. Amazon have got a couple of their own, of Amazon Honeycode, AWS Amplify Studio. Microsoft have got one called Power Apps. And really, if you think about the old school web builders that you got on the shared hosting or the Squarespace stuff or Wix, really that's a low-code tool as well and fits into that territory. You've then got the process builders, so something that might take an input off a website or be triggered by something happening. That's one of the Salesforce references I'll talk about. Microsoft have got their own called Power Automate. Some of that stuff runs on the desktop for controlling applications there as well. And then you can take those a little bit further and do what's integration services, or this term called iPaaS, Integration Platform as a Service, because everything has to be as a service nowadays. And really that's just a glorified process builder, but taking your data from one source to another. So why low code? I'm a developer. Why should I care about this? Why is it being pushed forward? Why are we sort of seeing more of it around? The low barrier of entry is interesting. I made a reference to the fact that my team isn't all developers. There's what Salesforce call admins. They've got a developer mindset, but if I turned around to one of them and said, hey, can you write some code? They'd run a mile. Even when I try and get them to review some of my code, it could just be my code, they run a mile there. But they're quite happy to sort of use a drag and drop way to solve a problem. Some of those people are non-traditional developers. They could be someone in a sales team or a support team who know just enough to be dangerous, not be dangerous, but actually almost getting a first implementation out of them is quite interesting and cuts people out of trying to do requirements gathering. It's really being pushed by service providers as a easy or developer-free way of solving the solution. Companies don't want expensive developers, even if they're small, so, use our platform, it's got this drag and drop way, anyone can do it, you don't need to care about anything. It suddenly becomes appealing to businesses. Amazon, AWS likes using the term undifferentiated heavy lifting, especially if you listen to their podcast of why some of their services do what it is. If you've got a drag and drop way of going, okay, I want to pull data here, I want to insert it here, and it's done, do you want to reinvent the wheel and do all the API integrations for that? Might not be worth doing. And I also think that as we've broken things down into microservices, it's made it a lot easier to do this sort of thing. You can take one component of it and suddenly go, well, I can use an implementation for that and the rest can still be code, and you can pick and choose a bit more. So this is where, unfortunately, you're going to have to watch a 4-minute demo of me building something really basic in Salesforce just to show what some of the tooling offers and how some of the concepts are similar. So the background to this is that there's an account with some contacts on there. We want to build something that a salesperson can come along, see the contacts on the account, choose one and hit a button to send them an email for a special offer. I've cheated and written the email already and it's ready to go, but we'll watch what's there. Maybe. There we go. So Salesforce has a couple of different options. You can do screen-driven stuff for the UI or record-triggered stuff. So this field's been updated, I want to do this. We're going to do a UI-based one, and I'm just setting up an input variable to say what's the account. And this means that when we embed it on the account page later, we can pass the details in and it's an account. So we'll do that, and you would see it was auto-populating stuff, suggesting things. We're now going to go and build a screen. I need to label it and name it, and this is sort of where you start seeing developer concepts. Naming is hard, and a bit later you'll see where I forget what I call something because I've chosen really bad names. So the same sort of idea applies. So we're trying to come up with a radio button way of selecting contacts. So selected contact, data type is text, and now we need to pull out the contacts related to that account that we want to show. So this is what they call a record choice set. I'm going to label it contacts. I'm going to choose that it's a type of contact. And I'm just going to build a query. Using the account ID that we'll have passed in, I'm going to search against all the contacts for accounts which have got that account ID, we'll sort them, and then we'll go on and say that I want to show the name as the main option and I want the ID to be passed in. So really, it's a query builder but driven by UI, autocomplete and triggering it through. For someone who's not necessarily got a developer background, it's not too dissimilar to advanced searching and stuff that they might use in tooling anyway, which is what helps make it accessible. Because doing UI and design work is always effort, we can inherit the style that's already used. I can turn off which buttons I want. I can relabel it. Say we'll label, finish, send email. I don't care about previous and pausing. And that's our first screen setup. So I now want it to send an email out. So I'm going to choose an action. I said I've cheated and already created an email. So that is the action to call the email. We're going to populate it and it will pass through in a moment the contact that's selected, and this is where I forget what I've called things. So I will have a momentary lapse of thinking. There we go. Remember, it's coming from the radio button option, and essentially I'm just passing the contact over. So it's already mapped the ID and it will go through. And for a bonus, I've decided that on the account I want to mark the date and time that we sent this email. So there's a couple of ways of doing this. I could have taken the account record that we passed in, updated the field and just saved it. Or in this example, I'm going to do it query style again, find the account and update this field to a certain value. So I can talk through it quicker than I can click things on a screen. And what I find interesting about sort of populating the values in, and you'll see it when I pull up the date time field, they're able to tailor what's defaulted in. So they know if it's a Boolean field that they should offer true and false as default options, but maybe not the date time stuff and vice versa. So you're able to correct for a little bit of what someone might do. And now I've decided that someone should know if it's sent, so I'm going to throw another screen with no options in there. You'll notice in this I put 0 error handling in here. If there's no contacts on the account, it's going to give me a blank screen. If I mess something up, it's just going to error horribly. Yeah, it's a demo. That's why I've done that. But it is the bit that people tend to forget and what we need to consider as well when we're supporting others. So I'm going to save it, and now I'm going to run through a debug screen. It's going to tell me that I don't do anything on the last screen. I don't care. The debugger that they've got built in is interesting. I can feed in data. So if this was a production org, and please don't do this on production type thing, it can feed through the data and do it, but it runs it in a way that it doesn't actually save any records. Really useful testing approach using real data. On the right-hand side, it outputted what it was doing. It was all fine, so I saved it, activated the version that we want to make live, and now I'm dragging and dropping it into the interface for someone to use. So this is where we start going into like the web builder interface. So I've literally been able to drag, saying I want a flow component, I want it to be my special offer sender, I remember I need to pass some details in, and then we'll save that, and it will hopefully show up in a moment. So we can go through, hit send email, and it's done. So that's sub 5 minutes. I've written a very basic interface to pull some details out, select one, send an email, and update it, which is probably quicker than I could write it in code. I'm sure someone will challenge it, but it's an interesting starting point. And I've demoed it from Salesforce's perspective. You'll notice it was like building a flowchart, essentially, possibly what many of us do before we even start implementing things as part of a design process. Other systems are very similar. So Microsoft's is in the bottom right. You can see it's got a flow type approach. AWS Honeycode for building their UI type things. Again, they've got nesting and little bits and elements that you can change. It goes on. Mendix, they've got their drag and drop things. Amazon, this is their app flow for doing integration from one service to another. It's just basic fields for selecting what you want to pass through. So there's no sort of complicated elements to it. It all starts looking very similar to each other. And now you're going, but Lee, I'm a developer. You've wasted 10 minutes of my life telling me how I could drag and drop things, but I'm never going to do that. I'm just going to write the code. And yeah, that's fine, but just because you're not solving the problem using the code doesn't mean it's wrong, especially if you start thinking about some of those integration services of putting data from one to another. Might be worth thinking about sometimes. Knowing the limitations and what these sort of tools offer is really useful if you're having decisions internally. If you've had the CEO, it's had a big vendor go, you want to buy my tool for this reason, knowing what it's doing and what they might need to think about, and that the lies of you don't need a developer to do anything with this is worth knowing about. It helps provide a stepping stone for people getting into code. If you've got people coming up through interested in this sort of thing, if you've got an accessible method of doing it rather than writing code, that can help them out. And low code doesn't mean code free. So going back to some of the interfaces that people use, this is Amazon AppFlow at the top again. It references a Lambda function. So you can write a complicated Lambda function to do something and expose it for someone else. Microsoft's Power Automate, you can drop JavaScript in there to do something advanced you can't do. That's another snippet of Salesforce's Flow stuff. The couple of things at the top called Apex actions are calling code. So you can wrap up something more complicated and then sort of blend the two together. So if you've got limited developers, they can do some more complicated things and make it accessible. No images of this one, but if you're a vendor offering services, if you're able to offer components to your customers who can then use it in low code options, that becomes interesting as well. Suddenly, if some of these have app exchanges, or you can bring things off GitHub and stuff like that, if you've got that available and you can save your customers time because they don't have to write the code, that's another thing to look at. And we also talk about standards a lot. We've got someone who likes talking about APIs in the audience, so open API specification. We like meeting that sort of thing because it produces nice documentation and examples to do. Going back to a Salesforce example, they've written a tool that can pull in an open API spec. It will generate the Apex code based off of that and then provide those Apex actions for people to use in a flow. So you can suddenly have someone integrate with a third-party API which meets the specification without writing a single line of code, which is interesting from my point of view. But it's not all issue free. You get a lot of vendor lock-in. A lot of these tools charge money for these things. You end up with a learning curve. Each new system has a different way of doing things, even if they are similar. And there's a couple of key ones which, as a developer, stand out to me with issues. Version tracking is a nightmare. We all use version control systems. Most of these don't have that. They might have built-in versioning available. You might be able to export it as XML or JSON or something like that and put it into a version control system yourself. But that's all a bit manual. If you're trying to do peer review and see what someone's changed, trying to pull up two user interfaces and work out what field they've changed somewhere which might be embedded into a button somewhere is an interesting one. And definitely isn't what I spent an hour a day doing. And at that point, you almost want to export the XML and try and work out what they have changed. And the other one is support for different environments. Some of these tools have the ability to go from a dev environment to a staging to a production or whatever you want. Others expect you to have different accounts or might not even offer that ability. So you're back to exporting your XML and hoping they've got an import option and that you're not having to do the drag and drop between two accounts again and trying to recreate. Testing. We all love testing now. We all write tests, right? It's all sort of ramped, in my opinion, built up over the last few years. Testing's important and it's grown. They're sort of like back where we were 10 years ago going, testing, that should be something that should happen. It's all very much manual testing at the moment. You show me the built-in debuggers which help. You've got the preview tools, but there's no real automation around it. Some of them you can sort of get integration tests or full system tests if you've got code around it and write it that way. But beyond that, an automated test to say input this at the start and I expect this at the bottom, it's not very common at the moment. And I think that's one area that these tools sort of need to grow in. So in summary, because I've rambled for almost 15 minutes now, be aware of these low-code approaches. They seem to be growing more common with our cloud providers and they've all sort of got it. Don't immediately discount using a low-code solution just because it's not cool, because it's not code. And support others who are using low-code approaches. We've got a lot of the mindset. We've come up with a lot of experiences around testing and version control and stuff like that. This will be new things that people haven't faced before. So if they are sort of in that area, that's where we can offer our guidance and learning to support those tools. And that's it. Thank you very much.